name is Rabia Hawa. I'm the founder and executive director of Ulinzi Africa Foundation and the Walk with Rangers initiative, and I'm also an honorary warden with the Kenya Wildlife Service. I grew up in Kenya for most of my life, but my father worked in aviation, and as a result of that we traveled most of Africa. We also lived in Saudi Arabia for about 4 years, and so my childhood was in between lots of different countries, but the one thing that always remained constant was a love and connection with nature and the environment, and also wildlife. I actually wanted to study marine biology at university level, but I wasn't able to do that. What I was able to pursue instead was a college certificate in teaching, so I'm a qualified Montessori teacher. But simultaneously, as I finished school, I landed a job in the media with one of our local radio stations. After a couple of years working in radio, I then got an opportunity to work at a television station, which was sort of a cable TV channel. And that was a new horizon for me. It was a new frontier. I'd never done TV before, and I'd already been doing radio for over 10 years. And so when the opportunity came about for me to do television, I took it because I wanted to explore that further and see if that would be a different avenue. But even while I was working in radio, I used to spend all my leave days and my weekends in the field working with wildlife. And now I've moved on from that and I'm completely embedded in wildlife. I had always been interested in conservation or animal-related studies because I couldn't explore those further. What I did was utilize my media platforms to then share that information. So most of the programs that I did, of course, starting with the graveyard shift and moving into a weekend show and then starting drive shows and breakfast shows on various stations, I would then try and integrate some element of wildlife or conservation education and awareness in my programs, and that was seen to be different, but it also was taken quite well by obviously our management and the public. They enjoyed listening to stories about people who had had encounters with wildlife, to stories about people who are working to protect and save wildlife, but I always felt like there was something I could do more. And just one thing led to another, really, and my vision completely changed. Initially, I just had a sort of one-track mind, trying to grow myself in media because that was now my new established career path, but there was always something missing, you know, and that was obviously the wildlife element. I was writing for one of our local newspapers, and I was utilizing my contacts in the field who would share information with me about what incidents were going on, and then I would then propagate that information with some of my other journalist friends, and we would try and make sure that it got into as much media as possible, whether it be print, TV, or radio. And so that worked for me really nicely, and being able to still write in the paper and do television in two completely different media groups was an opportunity that I couldn't miss out on. So that's how I then made that transition into TV, which I didn't stay on for very long because, again, I was just reading the news, and I'm the kind of person who I feel like I need to be constantly growing just as a person, but also in every element and aspect of my life, whether it be my career or my religion or my personal life. There's always room for growth because you constantly have to work to improve yourself. So during my years in media, I spent a lot of time in the field, and I, by that time, had realized that there were significant gaps in the conservation space. One of those huge voids was the attention or lack thereof to the rangers who are working in the field and protecting wildlife and just basically putting their life on the line every day to protect our natural resources. They weren't getting a lot of attention. They were often seen as disposable. The mentality and the thinking at that time was if we lose one ranger, we can easily replace him with 10 more. And so there wasn't really a value for rangers, and that's what kind of affected me. Also, during my work in the field, by that time I had lost several friends who were shot by poachers, and that also spurred me to do something bigger and do something to raise more awareness and bring more attention to the rangers themselves. The other sort of gap that I found in the conservation arena was an area of my country where there isn't any conservation attention or sufficient conservation attention for various reasons. One, it's the instability of the area overall, but also because it seemed to me at the time, and still to quite a great extent today, that there are certain pockets of my country that get a lot of attention and awareness because they're already heavily marketed as tourist destinations. And so if you do a project in one of these areas, it's much easier for you to get the resources and establish yourself as an organization. And that, for me, presented itself as a challenge. And I took it up. And I'd never imagined that I would actually have an organization of my own. How I started was to plan just an awareness trek. I'd been seeing on social media and mainstream media also how people were raising awareness for causes by climbing Mount Kilimanjaro or climbing some mountain or the other. I couldn't do that because I'm deathly afraid of heights, and also I can't stand the cold. And I needed something different but sort of similar to bring this message to the forefront that rangers' lives matter and we need to bring conservation attention to forgotten areas of my country. And so that's when I came up with Walk with Rangers, which was a cross-country trek between Tanzania and Kenya. It was over 250 kilometers and it took us 15 days to do it. And when I went for the route reconnaissance, I asked myself several million times, like, what am I thinking? Because it was very challenging just with the terrain and the climate, and you know, there's no facilities for miles anywhere, there's no clinics for miles. But I felt that it was really important to highlight that because that's an everyday life of a ranger, and it just worked really well as a message to the world. Between 2012 and 2014, which were my sort of final years in media, we were losing on average 8 elephants a day in my country. And that equated to regionally and sort of on the continent of Africa, an average of a loss of an elephant every 15 minutes. So that would be 96 elephants a day. We just don't have the herds to sustain that. And that was a huge problem for me, and I wanted to change it. People often forget that there is a human cost to wildlife conservation and protection. When we talk about elephants being poached, it's not just the elephants and the wildlife we're losing, it's people as well, whether it's poachers losing their lives to rangers in a shootout or rangers losing their lives to poachers shooting them. I've lost personally 6 of my friends, and several more have been very badly wounded and injured. But on average, we lose about 100 rangers a year globally in the line of duty. When I did Walk with Rangers in 2014, it was a cross-country trek. And I just opened a Facebook page and a lot of people started liking and sharing it, and it did get quite a bit of traction. Alongside that, I set up an online fundraiser, which I didn't think was going to raise very much, but by the end of it, we'd raised a significant amount, about $40,000, which my initial plan was to just split it between other organizations and just donate. But I felt that I was empowered to make certain changes on my own in these forgotten areas and forgotten spaces where other people weren't interested in going. And that's when I was really prompted to set up my nonprofit, Ulinzi Africa Foundation. And we sort of market or brand ourselves as Walk with Rangers because that was what brought us to where we were. What happened with Walk with Rangers was very interesting. Because it was a cross-country trek, I needed permission from both governments in Tanzania and in Kenya as well to do the trek. But then it grew during the time that I was pursuing all those permissions and having all these meetings to get whatever approvals and authorizations I needed. People who had been liking the page constantly kept asking me if they could join. And I thought, it's such a beautiful landscape and I'm only going to do it once in my life. It would be a shame to deny people that opportunity. And so I opened up for registration. We got a few businesses and corporates involved who sponsored us in kind, which brought our costs down significantly. And people were able to join us. I had 70 people from all over the world. And we just walked between the two countries, again, with the support of both governments who helped us with, for example, our visa issues and our passport stamping, because we were walking through the bush, so we weren't going to pass any immigration point. And I really needed a lot of law enforcement officers to come to where we were and help us stamp our passports and do everything correctly. So that was quite challenging for me logistically, but overall it goes to show that the government does have a will to work with people to conserve and protect wildlife and to raise awareness about the challenges rangers are facing. The challenge with government is they have limited resources, obviously. And if you're looking at Tsavo ecosystem in my country, for example, it's the size of Israel, and there's only a few hundred rangers that are working in there to protect wildlife. And what people don't seem to understand is we don't know where the animals are going to be. We don't know where the poachers are going to strike next, because our borders are all open. Our parks are not fenced, and they're not fenced for a reason. Our wildlife have migratory corridors, and if you fence them in, they can't then move to their breeding areas, to their birthing areas, and to their feeding areas. And what effectively then happens is, over the years, you get overpopulation of a certain species, and where you don't struggle with overpopulation, there's always the threat of inbreeding, because let's say if elephants are just locked in one space and they can't spread their gene pool outside of that space, they then start inbreeding over generations. And in order to make sure that that doesn't happen, we don't fence our areas unless there is a good scientific reason to do so. Sadly, one of the sort of byproducts of that is you have an easy influx and outflux of poachers. And so we just need to try and work together with the government as stakeholders in conservation to do everything that we can to protect our natural resources. Poachers use different methods to hunt animals. Some of them use poison arrows, some of them come in with guns, which I have to say is difficult, but it's also easy because you can hear the gunshots and you can then respond accordingly. When they're poaching with arrows or wire snares, which is basically just a wire loop that they put in between trees and shrubs, you can't hear what's happening. You can't hear an animal go in there or a poacher cutting it up. And so for me, rangers are really the first line of defense for wildlife, because they're on the ground every day. They're looking at the sand, monitoring what's happening. If there's footprints that we don't recognize, then we know that there's external activity happening, and we're able to respond to that. And that's why I also focus on rangers and empowering them, not only from my organization, but empowering rangers from other organizations as well, to be able to be more effective in their work and to stay safe when they're working too. One of the things that we've done as Ulinzi Africa Foundation is set up first aid training for rangers. What I found in my over 10 years of experience working with them in different areas of my country was a lot of them had never had first aid training, and we had loss of life just through excessive bleeding because no one knew how to pack a wound. And to date, we've trained over 200 rangers in critical first aid skills who are now able to not only respond to themselves, but also their comrades in the field in case of any incidents, and are hopefully going to be able to avert any negative outcomes. Life in the bush is not as tough as I thought it would be, but then again, maybe I just got used to it. For a first-timer, it is quite challenging because obviously there's hardly any facilities. There's no proper English toilet. It's just a hole in the ground. We have limited water resources, so we use it very carefully. We don't just spill water everywhere or leave taps running or anything like that. We really do have to be very careful about how we use our water. Our food is also very basic. We don't have fridges or freezers, so we rely on non-perishable dry food. So mostly it's just beans and rice, or what we call maize meal, with maybe lentils, just simple food, but it's high energy food that keeps you going for the long hours you need to work. A typical day would be starting from 7 or 8 in the morning and going right the way through until 4, just walking, and you could easily cover 30 kilometers in a single day. But it really depends on the activity. Sometimes you could get out in the field and there's no activity, so you come back early and you can do your washing and you can rest a bit. But other days there could be poachers coming in, and if there's elephant poachers, then there's no rest. You will track them and follow them if you need to do that consistently for 3 days or 4 days straight, which obviously means that you've only got what you've carried with you. So if you have 1 bottle of water and you're tracking for 3 days, that's all you have, and you have to be quite careful about your consumption as well. So it comes with its own physical endurance challenges, but once you rescue or save an animal, or you make an arrest of somebody who has been doing something bad, you've made a difference, and it's all worth it in the end. I launched my organization in 2014, so we're still quite new, but we have been obviously doing as much as we can with the resources that we have. With the funds that we raised online, we purchased a vehicle that had been working in the field for the last 4 years now with a rapid response anti-poaching unit. So basically it's just been working with rangers, pulling elephants out of mud if they're stuck. It's been involved in a lot of high-profile arrests, recovering G3 rifles and, things that basically make wildlife and communities not safe. And it's also been involved in rescuing baby animals and pursuing poachers on several occasions. So the thing with a vehicle is people just see the one car, but the amount of work that it does and the amount of just help that it brings to one team of rangers is just exponential. And so I'm really grateful to everyone that supported us with our first fundraising campaign for that vehicle, because it really saved a lot of lives and made a huge difference on the ground. It covered over 90,000 kilometers, I think. That's just so much. And really just was able to protect wildlife. But aside from just the vehicle, we've obviously trained over 200 rangers in first aid skills, and we've also been instrumental in providing gear for rangers in different areas. I talk to a lot of people just over email, and when I arrive for a meeting, they're almost just expecting something different. Usually it's expecting someone much larger than me in frame. I always say it's good for dodging acacia thorns when I'm running in the bush. But it's been interesting to see how people react to me and to my work. There's almost a sense of great disbelief for the first couple of minutes. And then when I start sharing what we've been doing and showing people what's happening on the ground, they're just overwhelmed. So our primary objective at the moment is to set up an anti-poaching unit of our own. So to date, we've been assisting other organizations with their ranger units, whether it's in cash, by training, or in kind. But what I would really like to do is now focus on that forgotten place in my country. And what I need is to have rangers put up there with a vehicle so that they're able to monitor that area. And just be on the ground, removing whatever traps are there for wildlife and actively protecting and saving wildlife and elephants. Of course, the greatest challenge for us is the resources that it takes to make that happen. To fully fund a unit, it would cost between 90 and 95,000 pounds for a year. But that's also because I refuse to pay my rangers a meager salary. I would like for the rangers on my unit to be well paid for the work that they're doing. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that rangers, when they do work, are signing up for almost a lifetime of wildlife protection, because it's not like any other job where you can go to the office and go back home in the evening. You're in the bush. You can't go home because your home is 8 hours away, sometimes 14 hours away. So you're committing yourself to living in your office for 11 months out of the year. oftentimes with no network to even make a phone call to your family. So it's quite a huge personal sacrifice, and I would like for my rangers to be well paid for that job. I'm looking to put my rangers on a salary of a minimum of $300 a month, which is our minimum standard wage in Kenya. And I'm hoping that our fundraiser does well and we're able to set that up as soon as possible, because it's quite critical what's happening in these forests. There's a lot of poaching. It's some of the worst cases of poaching I've seen in my whole country combined, and I would just like to change that. One time, somebody had donated a night vision monocular, and I couldn't figure out how to use it. So I was sitting by a waterhole in the evening waiting for the elephants to come in so I could try and see if I could see them through the night vision. And there was a herd of elephants on the opposite side, and I could hear them splashing around. So I'm trying to focus the thing so I can see them clearly, and it was so blurry, I couldn't see anything. And the next thing I know, there's a giant bull elephant, I think less than 10 meters away from me. And he just like shook his head, and I heard the sound of his ears, and I slowly put the monocular down, and I saw him just staring at me, and he did a mock charge, and I never ran so fast in my whole entire life away from that place. But that was one of, I would say, my heart-stopping moments. If I had one message to share with everyone, it would be that it just comes down to responsibility, really, doesn't it? It's not just my responsibility to care for the environment and to protect wildlife. It's everybody's responsibility, and especially if you're Muslim, because that's what Allah teaches us in the Quran. That's what the Prophet ﷺ taught us to do. Every act of kindness to any living thing is an act of charity. And when we focus all our charity efforts on feeding the hungry, that's good, but we can't use that as a reason to completely ignore everything else that's happening in the world. And sometimes it's not even about donating to charity, it's about just making an active change in your daily life. You could make a decision today never to use a plastic bag. I can't tell you how many animals, wild animals, that we have dissected in the field to do a post-mortem of, or what we call a necropsy in wildlife language, and they're just filled with plastic bags. And people don't seem to realize that when you use a plastic bag in the UK or in Ireland or in the US, it ends up in a water system somewhere, ends up in an ocean somewhere, and washes up on our shores in Africa, in India, in Asia. And that then affects the wildlife, because it gets into the wind, in the trees, and it just gets into their system. And we have to take responsibility for that, for our everyday actions. And what action can you do in your life today that is going to change the life of another living being halfway across the world, and that Allah's going to notice you for? So it's just about responsibility and not ignoring it, I would say.